I'm Jackie Miller-Charlton. I'm your host for the series, and I'm excited to be interviewing some exceptionally powerful, inspirational, world-leading women and bring you their stories. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of If She Can, I Can. Today, I am delighted to welcome a very special guest and our first male guest on the show. This gentleman is a colleague and a friend and an absolute stalwart of the film industry. I'm sure you're going to find this remarkably inspiring as Kent relays some of his experiences through his journey in film and all sorts of other little adventures along the way. So without further ado, please welcome to the show, Kent.
Jackie, thank you.
You're very welcome, and it is my pleasure to have you on. So, let's start at the beginning, shall we?
Yes.
I know that you were born in Southampton. Can you take us back? Well, you weren't born in Southampton. You were born in...
Bognor Regis.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Bognor Regis, of course.
Yes.
So, take us back to those early years.
Well, Bognor Regis is the home of the plague. It's a home of sanitation because we're still waiting for it. And I was very happy to be born there because there was absolutely nothing to do. So we had to make our own entertainment, which is probably where it all started.
With that wonderful imagination of yours. Was there a specific moment or influence that shifted you from the legal path I know you were originally going down to film and TV?
Well, you mentioned Southampton, and I got a place at the University of Southampton because at that time I was going out with a young lady who was a nurse in Chichester. So you have Bognor, next door to that is Chichester, and a little bit further down the line is Southampton. So I thought, well, I could go to Southampton. I should read something that makes me seem intellectual. So I got a place in the philosophy department. 3 weeks into the philosophy department, I had no idea what they were talking about. And so I went into the legal department, which is, it's a bit tricky because we're in competition with trained baboons as to who could get a degree first. So usually the baboons got the degree first. No, it was a wonderful, pleasant time. You can get a law degree in about 2 to 3 weeks. So it had a little extra 3 years of great fun in Southampton. But my key to being in the film business was finding a 9.5mm camera with some film in a drawer in my parents' house. My father had bought a 9.5mm camera and he'd bought some spare footage for it, little tiny 3-minute cassettes. And I thought, oh, I could use that. I could write a film, which I did. And it starred my sister.
Wow. And I understand that Canada was the place you went to in the 70s and where you actually started your film career in earnest. What were those early days like?
Well, I went to Canada in 1969. I borrowed a few quid from my dad to buy a ticket and a return ticket, and off I went to see what I could do. I'd met some Canadians who had rented a house from my father, and I thought they were tremendously nice people. But I thought, well, if they're all like that, I could make a name for myself over there. So I went to Toronto, and I met the woman that all of us should meet, Lady Luck. And by chance, I met some people who wanted to start in the film business. The film business and Canada were incredibly young, so we made it up as we went along. And in 1969, I made my first feature film.
Wow. So, can you recall the first time you saw your name in credits and what was the feeling like?
Well, I then commuted back to London, and I decided to, make my own film on behalf of our Canadian company. So it was 1973. Yes, I'd had my name up as executive producer and so forth, but this was produced by Kent Walwin, 1973, starred Oliver Reed and a young man called Derek Jacobi, and I was very, very proud of it. Wasn't any good, but I was very proud of it.
So you've went on to produce 20 plus classic films in that Canadian phase of your career. What were the biggest lessons and you took away from those?
Um, if it works, make it again. It's called a genre. We were lucky enough to get in on those early days of horror films. Sam Raimi, Bob Clark, who directed for us. So we had an absolute pool of ideas where young people find themselves alone in a forest, in a house, and there's a knock at the door, and the rest is the film. Some get out alive, some don't. We made Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, Necromania. Sam made Night of the Living Dead, and Bob did on Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. We were just on a roll, and there was a lot of talent there. And, it was fun. It wasn't the huge amount of form filling that you have to do now. There were no monsters like Netflix. You just went out, you made some movies, and most of them could make their money back in a drive-in. They cost $65,000, $70,000. Everybody had a great deal of fun, and we learned the art of filmmaking.
Wow. So when you returned to the UK, it was the 1980s, correct?
No. I was there in the 70s. I commuted.
Okay. What was the UK film industry like back then?
It was slightly more advanced by about a day than the Canadian film business. It was still a little bit class driven, as most things in this country are. But it also it didn't have that great idea that you could try a genre, make a horror film, make another horror film. So you tended to make films which was a book. Somebody had written a book and you bought a book and you made it because people thought it was a nice idea to do a book of a film. So it was a little bit, it wasn't as exciting as Canada. Canada, you could do anything. In the UK, you had to watch your P's and Q's.
Sounds about right.
It's exactly. And never has it changed.
Absolutely. So what were the unique challenges you faced in the UK film industry versus the Canadian film industry?
I was just because I was told to go away because I was early. So I went next door and it turned out that the barman was interested in films. And he said, "So when did you start?" I said, "I started in the 60s. He said, "What was it like?" I said, "You could start at one end of Dean Street, the other end of Wardour Street. And by the time you got to the bottom, if you had a good idea and you had maybe a few bob, you will find the rest of the money. So by walking up Wardour Street or walking up Dean Street, you could get your film financed."
And that's kind of the capital of the UK film
It was.
industry in London at the time.
It was, yes. Now it's finished. It's full of very second-rate tourists.
Sadly.
Yep.
You've worked with the BBC, ITV, you've had theatrical releases, independent studios. How do you balance your creative vision with the realities of distribution, finance, and actually paying back the money it's cost to make the movie?
There's three answers to that. One, it's got nothing to do with creativity. The second answer is it's got everything to do with getting the money. And the third is, how do you explain to people that you've just lost their money? But
I would have thought you would have managed that in a very creative fashion.
in 1970, I flew to New York and met a very elderly Jewish lawyer. And his was Israel. I won't give you his surname. And he said, "Hey, you want to be in the film business?" I said, "Certainly I do, Israel. Nothing better. We've done a few films." He said, "Okay. How much is your next film?" I said, "Well, it's probably $100,000. He said, "There's a check. $100,000.
Wow.
And he said, "I want you to tell me the real truth." I went, "What would that be, Israel?" "You're going to lose all my effing money." I said, "Probably." He said, "Not probably. You're going to lose it all." "Now, let me tell you, have you got any ideas?" I said, "Why don't we double the budget? So call it 200,000, write the whole lot off, and protect your 100,000 with a tax loss." He said, now we're talking. And that's how the tax shelter business grew up. And it kept us going throughout the 70s and the 80s and 90s until it was so exploited that Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs had to shut it down. But it was a wonderful way of making films. Everybody knew what was going on. And by and large, losses were protected by the taxman on the basis that you qualified as a British film, which wasn't that difficult.
I mean, sadly, I've noticed a decline in productions. Predominantly, I'd say more in the last couple of years when I've watched platforms like Amazon, Netflix, which you're paying a considerable sum for per month. But they're bringing in more films from abroad, more series from abroad that you have to have subtitles on, because obviously they're buying at a much cheaper price, but without reducing the subscription fees. And clearly that can't continue, because surely the consumer is going to get bored with the amateur productions, as it were.
We're in a different league now. When I started, I was in celluloid. So, we had to wait a couple of days to see whether we'd got anything recorded. Then I lived through digital. I went into facilities. I was the first owner of 1-inch helical scan equipment, etc. So, and now I'm so pleased that I am old enough to live through another revolution, which is the whole thing that people call intelligence by artificial means. Most of the films you see, whether they're abroad and so forth, are to some extent commented on, conceived, edited by machines. And they're jolly good, really good. Make it cheaper, no arguments. They cut the film, they just read the script, they make some comments on it. You've seen it. I remember you sent me a piece once that you'd run through ChatGTP.
Absolutely.
Takes a few seconds, and they're better than us.
Absolutely, for sure. Well, they've got a lot more information to scan, haven't they?
I have, yes. So
we've got one brain, they've got
millions
billions of brains.
Yeah.
Of the many iconic productions that you've been involved with, The Hotel New Hampshire, Handful of Dust, Biggles, Eichmann, is there one that you recall that shaped you the most, in your opinion?
One makes them for different reasons. Hotel New Hampshire was a pucker production, proper director, properly done, fine cast and so forth. Biggles, which was the first film I wrote, it was great fun to make. Biggles and his three friends, that was fine. Eichmann, when I went to university to read law, I decided that I should try and read something that sounded good. And so I read something that was evil, ghastly and frightening, called Nazi War Crimes. So I think that Eichmann, the story of Adolf Eichmann and his return and trial in Israel for war crimes, I think is a film that had to be done. Everybody was tried straight after the war at Nuremberg. They were taken out the following afternoon and everyone was hanged one by one, which they should have been, assuming they were guilty. Eichmann was a man who was captured many years after the war. He'd had a few reasons and a few ideas to think about what he could say in his defense. And he had an extremely honest trial, and he was found guilty. By then the Knesset had passed the death penalty for crimes against humanity, and Eichmann was hanged. But the trial was fair. It was interesting to make the film, to have a man standing in the dock who was just like us, who's a perfectly ordinary man. But he'd signed the death warrant for nearly 4 million people. Wow, that's extraordinary. Eichmann, yeah, it was a good film.
Unbelievable. You've always embraced risk, Kent. And from gritty historical dramas, the one of which you've just explained, to the Beatles tributes, and now AI-powered stories, where does your fearless creativity come from?
I'm not sure it's creativity. I think most of us have a gut feeling for entertaining each other, telling stories, remembering things that go bump in the night. So I think I'm no different from anybody else. I like a good idea. So I think, church attendances tend to go up as you get older. I'm now in my 80th year and, thinking about meeting my maker. So you might do films about him just in case. He's
On the good side.
on the good side. So I think, the film business is as venal as making underwear or men's suits.
I think you do yourself a disservice. I've known you a number of years and you are exceptionally creative and you're a very clever writer. So I don't think everybody has that skill set.
You can learn it.
I'm not so sure. I think that you can teach certain elements, but you've either got it or you haven't. I think it's like when you're a professional in any environment, I think there are those that stand out and those that do a job.
I think, a lot of it comes from, being born in the 50s. Our hospital was where we lived. If you were ill, you were thrown out on the streets. There was no care in the community. And most people got better, because we met lunatics. We met men who we knew were a little dodgy. But we're not idiots. We can protect ourselves, and we're a gang. If somebody tried something on, he would regret it. So I learned excuses. If I got home late, my mother went, "Where have you been?" Why not tell her a story that aliens came down and my sister would be back later, hopefully in the same manner that she left.
Yes, I can imagine what being a mother to you would have been like.
Yeah.
Hilarious. So later in life, never one to underestimate the challenge. You did a complete segue and you started looking at modular homes, energy, and all manners of innovation. What connects these seemingly entirely different worlds for you?
It's a story. The story connects everything. Life is a story. My interest in modular is how you can build old people's homes cheaply. Because sooner or later I'll start dribbling and I'll need to go into a home. The cost of my dribbling in the south of England is £2,500 a week, maybe a little less. This is totally and utterly unaffordable. It is madness. And so my idea for modular is, could we build houses that were very cheap, that use very little energy? You could build them on water, hence my floatable homes patent. And, let's just see if we could build these in a low-cost country. It's extremely expensive to have rubbish in this country. We export our rubbish, and I, as an 80-year-old, I'm part of that rubbish tip. So don't try and look after me here, bring in surgeons, bring in carers and so forth. Why not export me to a country where there's a perfectly nice little house, which is okay, and it's got a lot of people who would like to earn a living looking after me and so forth. And so when you look at modular energy, floatable homes, you're looking at other countries which might be very happy to take me and my ilk and give us a run for our money. There's nothing like being old on an adventure, because you've got to think about it. And, as my business partner in India says, he said, they're better looking, Kent, than the ones you've got.
The Marigold Hotel.
The Marigold Hotel.
On steroids.
On steroids, yes. You'd take those with you.
Coming back to film, I know that you're currently working on a range of projects, Sky Sisters, Return of the Gods, and a number of other projects. What excites you most about these stories? Is it that you wrote them? Is it that they're your babies? Is it that you need to get them out of your head and onto film? What is it?
I think I touched on this. I think that I watched my mother and my father as they got older, and there was a little tendency to walk closer to the church. Yeah, because you might just want to say, listen, I might have said a few things in my youth, but I was completely wrong, God. So I really apologize. And, I'd like to go in the left-hand door because it looks a little brighter than the burning flames in the right-hand door. So I decided that we can't compete with the Americans. If they want to do Wonder Woman, if they want to do Spider-Man, Superman, they have the money to do it. But we are very good at understanding a similar level of super people. And we might call them Jesus. We might call them the gods of Greece. We might call them the Prophet Muhammad, blessed be his name. So I decided to do religious superheroes and explain them as they were, not with all the Hollywood glitz and glats and walking on water. And, there's nothing wrong with The Chosen except that Jesus never made 52, which is the age of the actor playing him. Seems a bit odd. To me, Jesus is 16. He was divine. He had enormous amounts of energy. He was jolly nice to his mum. Girls loved him. And he was the first great superhero. And so we like things like that. Why do I like the Sky Sisters? Well, there was a series called, the first great, it's called The Band of Brothers. And the great parachute regiments landed, Americans, of course, not ours. Ours were landed in a strange place by mistake. But the Americans, who understand war, they got their parachute regiment and they battled their way to Berlin. The Russians suddenly found out that either Stalin had shot every male pilot or somehow they had crashed. So they put out the call, and because after the revolution women were trained the same as men, they had a plethora of female pilots.
Wow.
And these 565th, 66th and 67th regiments, air regiments, battled their way to Berlin. All female crews, from the pilots, servicing crews, maintenance and so forth. And,
Iron ladies.
they were iron ladies. They were extraordinary. And, and they looked so pretty, but never be fooled. They were very, very, very competent pilots. And so Sky Sisters is based on the true story of the air regiments of the Soviet Air Force.
Amazing.
Hmm.
I'm sure everybody would be fascinated to watch that.
Yeah.
You won an AI award at Cannes.
Yeah, well, I didn't, but we financed part of what was an AI, and they're now my AI team. So I thought, like with many things, I understand a lot of filmmaking, not because I know how to load a camera or I know how to do sound or I know how to do this, but I have a feeling for the industry. And it was obvious as we tried to do special effects and we did CGI and we did green screen, blue screen, that there was another world called artificial intelligence. So we were approached and this wonderful film was made, 15 minutes. I think it probably cost a few £1,000s. If it had been made by somebody eminent like Ridley Scott, it would probably have cost $1 million.
Incredible, isn't it?
It's about the Battle of Crécy, when English bowmen went across the Channel and, hugely outnumbered, took on the French armoured cavalry. What the French armoured cavalry hadn't known, and probably the bowmen didn't know, was that these arrows were armour-piercing. They were just so powerful.
Oh.
And they pulled 100 pounds, and when this went, it was as fast as a speeding bullet. It went straight through French armour. And
Wow.
they killed everybody. And we went, oh, bloody hell, we've done well.
Such an interesting story.
It is. Battle of Crécy,
So
1346.
how do you see AI affecting filmmaking in the future? Do you think that traditional filmmakers should be worried?
Not at all. Why should they be worried? I mean, when we went from celluloid, we were going to put out of business laboratories. We didn't need to process our film anymore. So the big labs I was the last film in one lab. Then we went to another. They're closing was it the end of the world? No, because people around here opened up as digital places. So we were the first people, us and Molyneux, bought into 1-inch Ampex machines, and we recorded our films on 1-inch.
So your advice is embrace new technology.
Of course, you have to embrace it, and all that AI is a method of finding imaging, animating it, and the AI guys are what I would call the CGI guys of the past. I mean, they're the new guys. They understand it.
New kids on the block.
New kids on the block. And, provided you use it such that, if I have Jesus and his brother James leaving home because they've got to get out of Nazareth, their mum's given them some money. Remember that 3 men gave her some money when Jesus was in the tummy, just come out. They gave her gold, frankincense and myrrh. Gold was what it was. Frankincense was an antibiotic, and myrrh was a sunscreen. What more does a nice young boy want when he wanders off? So I might have them going, and they're going through pastoral scenes, and they'd like to be 20,000 goats go across their path for no apparent reason. You press 20,000 goats, and bang, it turns up. You fiddle around with it a bit, and suddenly Jesus goes, oh, it's 20,000 goats. As a filmmaker, people go, cool, that's bloody clever. Where all those goats come from?
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. I mean, I do see some people, like writers maybe, I've had some protests where people have suggested that, AI can't replace me, I'm human, blah, blah, blah. But we're not talking about replacement, are we? We're talking about enhancement.
look, Jesus was illiterate. Jesus couldn't read or write. Okay? So he couldn't write down notes. So he had to remember them all. And so when his mother went, where are you going? He went, I'm going out. So she went, I want you to see if you can buy something. He had to remember it. They didn't read or write. So he had a jolly nice life. Lived at home with his mum, and she'd been given some money. And when he had to leave home because the Romans were after him, he goes off to Egypt. And I think that he didn't fear the new technology of the Romans. Roman technology was extraordinary. I mean, one of my iron ladies is Boudica. Wow. She rose up against the Romans.
I know. Amazing.
Amazing. She had an army of 80,000. An augmented division, a Roman unit, came down from Anglesey. It was about 2,000 men. And these guys are trained. And there's 80,000 men and women going, blah, blah, blah. First of all, they had iron swords. Romans had steel swords. Second, the Romans knew how to deal with this. So she said, right, we'll attack. And they ran. So the Romans do what the Metropolitan Police do today. They opened up, 10,000 men ran in, they closed ranks, killed them all. And it's basically where rugby came. They kicked them out the back, moved forward, next 10,000. They killed all 80,000 people. And then, well, that's a good job. And Jesus came across the Romans. They were an extraordinary people. And the most telling problem that we have in our film is that the legion that was based in Judea, Galilee, at the time of Jesus came from North Rhine-Westphalia. They were German auxiliaries in the legion.
Wow.
They spoke Middle German. So when Jesus went, hey, listen, I'm just out for the walk. And they went, what are you doing? Go, what's that accent? And they went, German. Well, I remember that.
So looking back over your 6 very, I would say, happy decades in the film industry, and various other enterprises. What would you say is the thread that ties your career journey to date thus far?
Fear.
No fear.
Fear.
Oh, fear. Oh,
Fear.
my goodness.
Yeah.
No fear.
No, not no fear.
Lots of fear.
Lots of fear. You know,
The fear of running out of ideas, the
running
fear
out of ideas, not being able to find the money to things, getting old, getting replaced. I started in the business when I was young. Canada was young. Youth can't do any wrong. You get to my age and people think I should be in a home, and I quite agree with them. But fear, yeah, of course, it's what drives us. Fear of getting
I
old.
wasn't expecting that answer, and I'm sure lots of people wouldn't be either. So, finally, on yourself, what does legacy mean to you? And what do you hope that the body of your work continues to inspire in others?
I think lots of people think work inspires people. It doesn't. At best, I would copy something and hopefully not get found out. I think that what we all hope to do is, first of all, meet a man or a woman that we can spend a lot of our life with. So that's the best thing, because that's a good thing. That's having a chum that you can talk about things with. And just waking up and going, there was a great movement in the 50s called WWJD. What would Jesus do? So I'm writing Jesus and I go, I wonder what Jesus would do. Apart from going, watch this and another miracle. And he did a lot of miracles. There are these charismatic people. Return of the Gods is about the heroes of today. Jeff Bezos, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Bill Gates, trillionaires. And then one day, the internet goes down in Greece. What? Well, the internet doesn't go down. The gods have returned. They've ripped up the Hades, and Poseidon have ripped up the sub-oceanic cables. And the internet's crashing. Now what are they going to do? And it's about the old ways when women were women and men were men. And suddenly these guys have to become heroes. Suddenly they have to come out of their San Francisco towers and take on the best that Greece can throw at them. And of course, they come up to the mark. Not all of them, but they are, And I think that
Story of good versus evil.
it's always the story of different ideas against different ideas. We want the internet, and therefore we need to make sure it's kept in a way that doesn't affect us. I think it affects us tremendously because we haven't worked out what to do with it. But when we do, it'll be jolly useful.
So moving on to the next section.
Yes.
Today, this is all about ladies of a bygone era who have inspired and enthused you through their story, through their career path, through what they achieved. And this whole podcast ethos is about passing on knowledge, passing on inspiration, looking to motivate, educate, enthuse, and inspire the next generation. Or maybe ladies who are looking to change direction in their life. So you have come across a great many of these women, Kent, in your line of work, and you are a storyteller. Please share with us, who have you chosen to spotlight today out of these many, many, many hundreds of remarkable women of a bygone era? And why these women?
Well, obviously, the first woman is my wife. My wife is an extraordinary woman, and by what she does, she will encapsulate other women in her stories, her adventures, her expeditions. So my wife is with her female friends. One day were with an explorer and he was complaining about the men he had to work with. He couldn't go back on the Arctic ice to the Antarctic plains with these men who sobbed and wanted their mummies and were no use unless a camera crew was there to give them a sandwich. So these girls were listening to this man's wife, who is his PR, and they all went, I tell you what, we'll go. And to my utter horror, my wife and her friends were off to walk to the North Pole. They had no idea, except they're intelligent, they train, and front pages of every newspaper. There's my wife and her wonderful women friends. They'd got there, all their silly flags, and they'd got there. So,
And how old were they when they did this?
they're probably in their 40s. So, they're no spring chickens. Some were a bit older. But they then went off to the South Pole. And there's a wonderful part film, part soundtrack. Because it was so cold, they used to carry their cameras or recording under their bosoms to keep them warm. So they put their hand in, take them out, and they got 60 seconds before it froze.
Yeah.
So they're there and they think they've got to the South Pole. There's a terrifying wind blowing, screaming wind. And they're going, gosh, we've got there, we've done it, we've got here. And then out of the blizzard that's blowing around, these two other women appear in fatigues. And they go, are you the women from England? Oh, yes, we are. Yes. Well, you're here. Congratulations. And our colonel has agreed that he can break out some drinks for you. What would you like? Oh, gin and tonics all round. And so they go, what is this terrible wind? And they go, oh, no, this is a C5 Galaxy Starlifter. It's just up the road there. You're standing on the runway, and it's about to launch its rockets for a rocket-assisted takeoff. It's got 600 tons on board of fossils and so forth that need to be taken back to the States. And so they all wanted over there. This is one of the world's heaviest planes.
Wow.
Thunders into the night sky. Wow. So my wife, I did Boudica as a short film. Faye Weldon had written it. And then I was always keen on Lady Jane Digby. I, of course, had fallen in love, as most men had, with the Queen of Sheba, with Gina Lollobrigida. And so we incorporate those extraordinary women into my wife's expeditions, my films, her stories, and it is just extraordinary. It's the real Iron Ladies,
What barriers do you think they faced in their own career
They're
in
gonna have-
industries?
They're going to have children. This puts women back a bit. It's a physical thing, having children. Men, the only thing that's going to happen to me after I get given birth to is I'm going to die. Nothing much else happens. Women go through this enormous transitory stage, which it takes them out because they've got to look after them. So a lot of these women, Boudica had 2 daughters. They were supposedly raped by the Romans. They weren't. They were engaged to the Romans, which meant in those days, as it does now, that they could have intercourse. But then the Romans broke off diplomatic relations. And so suddenly these girls, they'd been raped because they'd said yes. But Boudica had to cope with that. Lady Jane Digby, wonderful in 1863, I think it was. She finds herself in Damascus. She's been married to the king of this, the prince of that, and so forth. Very good looking woman. And she falls in love with a sheikh who is 20 years her junior. And she lives with him for the rest of her life. Wow. What a wonderful, wonderful story. And then the greatest of all is the founder of the Islamic faith. We forget that the Prophet Muhammad, blessed be his name, was married to Khadija, the great camel train owner, and she understood business and she looked after him. He again was 20 years her younger than she was, and she helped him when he went into the caves and when God approached him and dictated the Quran which he wrote down. So behind every great man is a woman. Behind Jesus was his mum. Behind the Prophet Muhammad was his wife Khadija. Behind Prasad Targus was his wonderful wife Boudica. It's extraordinary. These women actually had children, some didn't, but they helped their men become what they were. So it's now a reverse, is that as my wife goes off exploring, I am like Captain Scott's wife. I am Mrs. Scott, waiting to hear how my wife's getting on.
And of course, you don't mind playing that role, which is wonderful. You know, an Iron Lady for me of a bygone era would be someone like Queen Hatshepsut from ancient Egypt,
Oh, yes.
where she donned the male beard, the crown, you know, of the Upper and Lower Egypt. But she faced all sorts of trauma, including, by the way, actually being almost wiped out of the history books.
Of course.
From her stepson, who she had stepped in because he was only 4 when she took the throne. And as soon as he was able to take the throne, he wiped out, or tried to wipe out, 25, 30 years of one of the most successful periods in ancient Egypt, when it was reigned over by Queen Hatshepsut. So it's interesting that you are promoting and celebrating these incredible females, and yet some men find it very difficult to accept women can be equal to and sometimes better than some men. This podcast also, Ken, for me, is about collaborating between men and women to help each other to be the best we can be.
I mean, I think that, the great advantage of the film business is we need actors who are women just as much as we need actors who are men. It's a 50-50 world. Women are there for their attributes, men are there for their attributes. And it's a pretty fair game. I think exploration has been a pretty fair game. The Sky Sisters proved that in battle, women are really good. Women can take more damage than men. Men, I don't think, could quite have children in the same way that women have, because they'd never have them. Whereas women who were shot up in air in their terrifying planes they had to fly, they usually brought them back. Lily Litvak landed her plane and stationed it correctly. It is probably that she had been effectively mortally wounded, killed at 10,000 feet, and flew her plane back with a bullet in her head and landed it safely, and she was dead.
Wow.
I mean, extraordinary heroism that these women went through. And it was tough, because men don't mind the odd scar. It all looks nice. Women fear, disfiguration. And, nobody wants to be burnt, but you don't want to be burnt if you're a woman, because it's double trouble. So, yes, I think that by my wife doing these things and being out in the desert, looking at effectively their own bodies through the desert, we course with water, blood, refuse, everything is planned. And there they are in this extraordinary desert, which has exactly the same veins and arteries that we have built into the ground, which we help. Our good friends just had a stent. What's a stent? A stent is where the artery goes a bit wrong and they put a bit in. Well, the whole of the Saudi Arabian water peninsula is full of little water arteries with little clay things to keep it running. So she's there. And, when Yul Brynner was playing King Solomon, waiting in the turn of the millennium for the Queen of Sheba to turn up, played by Gina Lola Brigida, there was a camel train, and of course it's a love story. A little bit later, Khadija was there in 650 with the Prophet, looking after him, blessed be his name. And then Lady Jane Digby turned up, at the same time as Sir Richard Burton was there. Sir Richard Burton wrote probably 3 of the most erotic books in translation when he was in Damascus, one of which was 1001 Nights. So by my wife doing it, I can now look at maybe having the 1002nd Night, the story of what they were up to with the Princess Scheherazade. And because to Sir Richard Burton, the Princess Scheherazade probably existed. The woman who had to keep the king amused with stories so he didn't kill her. Such is
Well,
the
I'm
author.
sure you would have managed that no problem at all. How do you think that these lady stories still offer lessons in today's environment?
I think that, it's a funny old world we live in. And I think, female heroine, male heroes, it's still there, it's still alive, but, we've conquered everything. We're now in the business of destroying it. And that's a shame. But not in my lifetime.
Some would say it's cyclical. Some would say we build it, we destroy it, we build it, we destroy it, we build it, we destroy it, maybe.
Let me just tell you a story. I want my wife's film to open with incredible lakes, rivers, greenery, the most wonderful place on earth. And there they are, and we think it's what the desert might have been like. But they look up into the heavens, and there is the orange rust rock, which we call Mars. Mars had more water than we had. It was a teeming, wonderful place. And maybe it sits above us as a warning to what can go wrong if the atmosphere collapses and Mars just becomes the only molten thing on Mars at the moment is molten methane. I mean, it is not just toxic, it is destroyed. And it used to be like Earth. Wow. Let it be a warning to us.
I'm not so sure, sadly, whether we listen.
Look, it's going to be difficult to knock us all out, but maybe we'll start again. I mean, I went to see 28 Years Later. Don't. It's not very good. The first film was good in terms of how we fiddle around with things. But I think stories of daring do, Biggles, Biggles always got into his plane, put on his goggles, and went to fight whoever he had to fight.
And saved the day.
And saved the day. He did have a girlfriend who was French, who, of course, let him down. We think he didn't speak very good French and misunderstood her. But
listen, men misunderstanding women.
Oh,
Can you imagine?
God, I can't believe it. I talk so much, I don't listen.
How do you think history will remember these remarkable ladies?
Oh, I think with great affection. Sir Richard Burton was very good looking, even better looking than Richard Burton. So Sir Richard Burton, who discovered the source of the Nile, would speak, but he was late because he was measuring the locals' private parts because he was very, very interested in,
I'm sure he was.
It's bigger than yours. And he effectively was married, living in Damascus, and visited by the wonderful Lady Jane Digby, the courtesan of Europe who decided to turn up there. And we're going to make a film about the Sheikh, which, if you remember, was the 1920 Academy Award-winning film, The Sheikh, with Rudolph Valentino, an Italian playing an Arab. We've got a wonderfully good-looking Arab to play an Arab, and it's the true story of how he and Lady Jane and a young girl, and you play the mother of the young girl. Do you remember?
Or yes, or in your mind.
In my mind.
I'm not, by the way, just for clarification, I'm not in this movie.
In my mind, you play the mother of the young girl. And it's a remake of The Sheikh. It's a remake of, the fragility of relationships where they come together where they have to. If it's the chips are down, you don't know where you are, and you've got to find water, you've got to eat, and you've got to look after each other. Two women, one man, they'll get on.
If these females were alive today, what advice do you think that they would give to younger women?
Um, I wrote it down here. So I want to turn back and think what was the advice. I think they would always say that the best thing is to look like a woman, behave like a woman, and be a woman. I think that the sexes are here for a purpose. And that doesn't mean that, we don't muddle them up occasionally. Why not? I boarded since the age of 6. I've seen things that would make Greg Wallace look innocent. I think that if you're a woman, behave like a woman, and if you're a man, behave like a man, and then everybody will get on. It's what we like.
Indeed. How important do you feel true collaboration between the genders is? Not just in entertainment, but across all industry, indeed across life.
I think that in war, you find tremendous collaboration. I think, the planes that were ferried over here, my friend at prep school, his mother was a Brill Cream girl. She brought the big bombers in from Canada. There's 2 of them flying, had no idea where they were, and they're flying a plane, which was extremely complicated. And they ferried them in. You look at the fighter pilots, we mainly had male fighter pilots exclusively, but maintenance was done by women, and you tended to make sure that woman mended your plane, because if it stopped in midair, you're in a lot of trouble. And then, of course, the Russians, they put the girls into the air, and they fought like hyenas. Good God, they were tough. And they looked so pretty, I mean, so I always say, think like a woman, act like a woman, and look like a woman, and we'll all get on tremendously well.
And use the assets of both genders to work together and achieve a greater outcome.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, men enjoy the company of women. I remember when Gilbert Harding, when I was a young man and it was the radio, and somebody asked him whether he was a homosexual. I thought I was going to die. Nobody asked Gilbert Harding whether he was homosexual. We knew he was a homosexual. And he said, if by that you mean that I prefer the company of men than women, then call me a homosexual. But he referred to the interviewer, I know that you're happily married, so I might call you a heterosexual because you fancy the company of women more than men. Who cares? And he was just wonderful. Gilbert Harding looked like the back end of a bus, was gay in a time when nobody talked about it. But we all knew. I mean, this idea that you've got to protect children, we could spot somebody who could do us harm a long way off. It was instinctive.
Yes.
And I think that today, whether you're a man and a woman, so much of this has been groomed out of us. At best, we are feral animals, and all the better for it.
But all the more reason we should work together.
Well, of course, we hunt together, and we should work together. I mean, I would, I always send men and women out, because we have different senses. We can feel things differently. So I think we collaborate very well. And men and women like each other. God knows why, but they do.
Finally,
Yeah.
as an observer and champion of really strong women, what do you think constitutes to being an iron lady?
Oh, I think it's a belief in your principles. I think that the strong women I've met are feminine women, but they have strong principles just as men can have strong principles. And that transcends gender, principled. When the girl said, we're going to go to the North Pole, the men could have said it, but probably wouldn't have got there. Because we are a bit willy wavers, and whereas women are incredibly cooperative. I think I watch women and I wonder at their cooperation, how they get on, how they defer to each other, how they think about what they're going to do when they're in danger, whereas men tend to collapse, tend to want their mothers to come and get them out of it. I have a high opinion of men, but, they need women to function.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, I believe in both genders working together. It performs a much greater outcome. And obviously, for our younger ladies watching, this is our first male guest, everyone. And if she can, I can. And I think that what Kent is demonstrating is that when we work together, that we can achieve great outputs. And he has worked with many incredible women over the years, which is why I invited him on today. And it's been an absolute pleasure, Kent, having your opinions, sharing your life story, albeit brief. And thank you so much.
One last story without naming a very, very famous actress that I was privileged to work with. And this is slightly a naughty story, but it actually sums up life. And we were doing a very, 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 very big concert with huge royalty. And I got a message to say that the very, very famous actress wanted to see me. So I go to the star, knock on the door, come on in. Where are you? In the lavatory. Can I come in? Sitting on the loo. She goes, how old do you think I am? I said, this is not a time to discuss your age. Anyway, you're sitting on the lavatory. She said, a very strange thing has happened. I'm going to tell you, I'm in my late 60s. And I'm having a period. I said, you can't be. You are hemorrhaging. And this is much more serious because you've got to be on in 15 minutes. She said, well, what? I said, why don't we get some newspaper and so forth and plug it until we can get help.
Oh my goodness.
When it ends. And she said, I'm not doing this. I'm not going in front of royalty with newspaper jammed up. So I said, well, what do you want me to do? And she said, you ought to go down and get me some cotton wool. I said, where am I going to get cotton wool? She went, that is your challenge. So I went out. I ran. I'm an asthmatic. I ran down to South Kent Tube Station. I got acres from the pharmacy that I know was still open. I got in a cab. I get back. We got 5 minutes before we're up. And I go in this with enormous act. And I always thought, as she came on stage, unbelievable, beautiful, wonderful. And she was lugging around about £15 worth of cotton wool.
Which no one knew.
Nobody knew. And I thought,
The show must go on.
The show must go on. And all she didn't want to do was to go on with newspaper. That's the difference between men and women. Men would have used newspaper, what the hell? But she went, no, I can't go up with a newspaper. You're going to have to get me cotton wool, which I did. And it was one of my most wonderful stories. And if it hadn't happened to a very famous person with very famous royalty, and we have it all on film, obviously not me in my conversation with her, but she went on and wowed the audience, and she was in great discomfort. Whatever had happened, I never asked, she could have told me. But anyway, a little story.
And she smashed it.
Yeah.
Well,
There you go.
but folks.
Yes.
So, thank you very much once again, Kent.
Well, thank you, Jackie. It's lovely.
And we'll see you next time
Yes.
for another episode of She Can, I Can, What It's Like to Be an Iron Lady.